My sermon passage is on the page before, 1051. It's Hebrews 11, verse 29, 2, and through chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 again. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as if on dry land. But the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and scourging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering over deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though well attested by their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had foreseen something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. Good morning, young people. It's a little late in the summer for it, but this is going to be more like a vacation Bible school lesson than a sermon. It's because my daily personal Bible reading this week collided with a Sunday lectionary. I noticed some things about someone in that great cloud of witnesses who'd become before us in faith that I had never really noticed before. It's about Jephthah, whose rash vow to God caused him to sacrifice his daughter, which we don't like to talk about, but it's there. One, Jephthah did a lot more than that. And two, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32 lists that scoundrel and worse as one of the great cloud of witnesses, Jephthah. It's startling. If you know the story of Jephthah, it's startling that he's there. So it got me thinking that I and we might benefit a little from reviewing some of the people held up in this passage as paragons of faith. The scripture says that they were faithful, but they sure were faulty, like us. Worse than us, actually. Which means there's hope for us and for everyone. But first, remember what Hebrews is. It's a sermon. And it was delivered to an apparently small group of Jewish Christians who were worn out from struggling with hostility, ridicule, and shame, which sounds a lot like the broader church in this country right now to me in some ways, or the remnant. Christian nationalists like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia and Lauren Boebert of Colorado are fostering idolatry and bringing hostility, ridicule, and shame upon the church. Christian nationalism has been in the news a lot. It's not new, but it's been in the news a lot. And here's what it means, according to Professors Andrew Whitehead at Indiana University and Samuel Perry down at OU. They summarize Christian nationalism and its aims with 6 statements. 1, the federal government should declare the United States a Christian nation. 2, the federal government should advocate Christian values, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize the devil's in the details. Because 3, the federal government, they say, should not enforce the strict separation of church and state. 4, the federal government should allow religious symbols in public places. Again, not terrible if that were open to all, but that's not what they mean. 5, the success of the United States is part of God's plan, which also doesn't sound that bad, but it depends on what your definition of success is, doesn't it? 6, the federal government should allow prayer in public schools as if there's not. But they don't want what we've got now, which is the freedom to pray, or not. They want state-approved and state-sanctioned alleged Christian prayer. No, thanks. The whole movement, Christian nationalism, is bringing hostility, ridicule, and shame upon the church. And with the numbers of us who are not part of that frankly un-American and un-Christian philosophy in such decline, it's not hard for us to get worn out from the struggle. The struggle to keep church as church and state as state for the sake of both. And for the sake of something that truly is holy, liberty and justice for all. And all means all, not just Christians, and for sure not just Christian nationalists. So, if you're worn out by it all, and if you find yourself thinking less than Jesus-y thoughts, and blurting out less than Jesus-y words at your TV or your smartphone, or worse, and if you're struggling with it all, you're not alone. And we can keep in mind and to heart that Jesus is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, not us, not me, not you, not Representatives Greene or Boebert, or any other Christian, or any other nationalist, or so-called patriot, and certainly no Christian nationalist. And we can look at some of the imperfect witnesses who came before, and hear the Hebrews sermon's main message, that faith, among other things, is the courage to endure. So who were these people? We know some of them pretty well, like those whose faulty faith and courage, led by Moses and Aaron under God, got them delivered out of Egypt. We know them pretty well. We probably remember Joshua, who fought the Battle of Jericho. We surely know of David and Goliath and Bathsheba, and Samson and Delilah, and Samuel, the miracle child, and his formerly barren mama, Hannah. We know him a little, somewhat, don't we? But the others maybe not so much. So let's look at the faith and faults of Rahab, Gideon, Barak, and Jephthah. Now, I bet you most of you know the Rahab story. Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given friendly welcome to the spies, Hebrews says. Intrigue. Hebrews just hits the high points, because the congregation knew its stories, and they knew its scriptures, and they didn't need all the details. But maybe we do need some more details. In the book of Joshua, chapter 2, it tells of the Gentile, Rahab's, shrewd courage in aiding Joshua in the invasion of Jericho as the Israelites started trying to settle or conquer Canaan as its promised land. Okay? It says she lived inside the city wall, which was more than a wall in our mind. It was a fortification with plenty of living space and storage space inside. When Joshua sent 2 spies to scope out the place before he attacked it, she outsmarted the spies, negotiated with them, hid them, kept their secret, and then helped them escape. Rahab was a prostitute, but apparently not a temple prostitute, not a religious fertility cult type thing. And she wasn't an adulteress, which then would have meant that she dared to violate some man's legal ownership of her body. Professor Teresa Hornsby says that because Rahab seems to be autonomous, at least as autonomous as a woman could be in that time and place, there's no reason to suspect adultery, and she gets accused of that in some quarters. Rahab, it seems, is a woman who sells her body in exchange for money or goods. She owns her own house, perhaps a kind of bordello. During the spy drama, Rahab, remember a Gentile, nonetheless confesses that Yahweh, the Israelites' God, is the God of all the universe. She exhibits her faith. She's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. First, Matthew includes her in his genealogy of Jesus, identifying her as the mother of Boaz, who was the husband of Ruth. They think maybe Matthew did that to emphasize that Gentiles were part of Jesus' origins too, and part of his birth story. Second is her mention in today's Hebrews passage, which praises her for her faith. And third, in the Epistle of James, he praises her works. So it sounds like she's got all bases covered. Rahab was courageous and faithful, yet faulty. Next is Gideon. Gideon was one of the judges of Israel before there were kings. Judges weren't like what we think of judges now. They were more like tribal chiefs, chieftains. They governed the people, but they also engaged in diplomacy with foreign nations, and they led armies into battle. Gideon enters the picture at a time when the people of God were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, as it says, which was a lot. Some regional neighbors, the Midianites, were harassing them and raiding their caravans at harvest time, when harvest time for food crops could make or break a people. God calls Gideon from one of the least tribes, the smallest, and commissions him to deliver Israel from Midian. Gideon, like Moses and others, protests that he's not fit for such duty. He's timid, but he's brave in another way. He tests God by asking for signs. He lays out a fleece, remember? He lays out a fleece, the wool from a sheep, and he demands that God put the overnight morning dew on it and not on the ground around it. Then he demands the opposite, a dry fleece in the morning, but wet ground. He gets that. Then he demands the opposite again. He's testing God's patience. So he's not a coward, he's timid. Well, he finally gets it, and he understands the responsibility that God has given him to bring Israel back. But the first thing he has to do is clean house, his own house, because Gideon's father owns altars to some of those other gods over there. And at God's command, Gideon tears down his father's altars and builds a new one dedicated to Yahweh, to God, the Israelites' God. Well, the neighbors wanted to kill him for it. But his father, figuring out that if his gods could let their altars be torn down, they weren't much for gods, he defended his son against them. So then Gideon puts together an army to go fight the Midianites. Just as they're about to take off, God objects. God says the 32,000 fighters that he's mustered are too many, even though there's 135,000 fighters for Midian. Well, he releases everybody who's afraid, but only 10,000 leave. God objects again and reduces Gideon's forces to just 300. That's what it says. 300, presumably so that they will know that God and not them won the battle. At the high point of that story, Gideon throws himself face down on the ground and worships God. He is faithful. Then he and his 300 men sneak out to the Midianites' camp under cover of darkness, and as someone put it, they produce a light and sound show of 300 torches, 300 trumpet blasts, 300 shouts, and 300 jars smashing. Awakening suddenly, the Midianites panic, and they lash out at each other as they try to flee back to safety on the other side of the Jordan River. Gideon, whose tribe is Manasseh, manages to get crossways with one of the other tribes of Israel. During some sloppy diplomacy, he's trying to get help to go against the Midianites from the other tribes, and he makes them mad. So he has to fight them a little bit. And they get through that, and then Gideon and his little army then heads east, going after the Midianites again. And on the way, they attack 2 Israelite towns for not sending men to help him. This is messy business, isn't it? After 7 years of harassment and oppression and fighting with Midian, they come to peace finally, and the Israelites try to draft Gideon to be their king. He declines. Another professor, Judith Sanderson, explains that Gideon's refusal to be appointed as king is as hollow as it is theologically correct. His words attribute kingship to Yahweh alone, but his actions claim the privileges of kingship for himself. He takes the royal crescents, the pendants, and the purple robes that they seized from a couple of kings that they killed on their way, plus hundreds of golden earrings, one from each soldier's personal plunder. Each soldier got to take something, and each of them got some earrings. And Gideon wanted one for each of them. Interesting stuff. Also, in royal fashion, he has many wives and 70 sons. Despite the trouble he causes for Israel, Gideon is credited eventually with 40 years of rest for the land and peace for Israel as one of the greatest judges. Hebrews lists him among other greats in the cloud of witnesses to God in our tradition and heritage before Jesus. Gideon was courageous and faithful, yet faulty. Next is Barak. The story about Barak, an ancestor that Hebrews says is to be commended for his faith, is also a story of Deborah, the female judge. And it's a heck of a story, so I'm going to let the Message Bible, which knows how to tell one, tell a lot of it. It's from the book of Judges, chapter 4. The people of Israel kept right on doing evil in God's sight, and God sold them off to a king of Canaan. Sisera was the commander of his army. The people of Israel cried out to God because he had cruelly oppressed them with his 900 iron chariots for 20 years. 900 iron chariots at a time before Israel had that kind of armor. Deborah was a prophet. She was judge over Israel at the time. She held court under Deborah's palm between Ramah and Bethel in the hills of Ephraim. The people of Israel went to her in matters of justice. She sent for Barak, and she said to him, "It has become clear that God, the God of Israel, commands you, go, prepare for battle. Take 10 companies of soldiers. I'll take care of getting Sisera to the battle site with all his chariots and troops, and I'll make sure you win the battle." Barak said to Deborah, "If you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." She said, "Of course I'll go with you. But understand that with an attitude like that, there will be no glory in it for you. God will use a woman's hand to take care of Sisera." Deborah got ready and went with Barak. 10 companies of men followed him, and Deborah was with him. Sisera immediately called up all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, along with all his troops. Deborah said to Barak, "Charge! This very day God has given you victory over Sisera. Isn't God marching before you?" Barak charged, his 10 companies following him. God routed Sisera and all those chariots and all those troops before Barak. Sisera jumped out of his chariot and ran. Barak chased the chariots and troops. Sisera's entire fighting force was killed, not one man left. Meanwhile, Sisera, running for his life, headed for the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, an elder who was on good terms with that Canaanite king. Jael stepped out to meet Sisera and said, "Come in, sir. Stay here with me. Don't be afraid." So he went with her into her tent. She covered him with a blanket. He said, "Please, a little water. I'm thirsty." She opened a bottle of milk, gave him a drink, and then covered him up again. He then said, "Stand at the tent flap. If anyone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' tell him no, not a soul." Then while he was fast asleep from exhaustion, Jael took a tent peg and hammer, tiptoed toward him, and drove the tent peg through his temple and all the way into the ground. He convulsed and died. Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera. Jael went out to greet him. She said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." He went with her, and there he was, Sisera, stretched out dead, with a tent peg through his temple. On that day, God subdued that king of Canaan before the people of Israel. The people of Israel pressed harder and harder on the king of Canaan until there was nothing left of him. Barak doubted God. Barak did not trust God to follow through. And he wouldn't answer God's call unless Deborah, the judge, the tribal chief, went with him. She did. The glory for vanquishing Sisera then belongs to a woman. Women, actually, it looks like. Both Deborah and Jael. Barak was not brave, but he was willing to sacrifice his honor by allowing a woman or women the glory accruing from God's victory. He did answer God's call, but only after negotiating with Judge Deborah. Barak was, after all, faithful yet faulty. And one wonders why Hebrews, which does mention Rahab, doesn't also list Deborah or Jael as among the cloud of witnesses. Finally, Jephthah, a name you hardly ever hear mentioned without mention of his daughter, who isn't named. Jephthah makes an ill-considered vow that if he wins an upcoming battle with the Ammonites, he will sacrifice whatever comes to him first from his tents upon his return home. And it was his only daughter. If you know anything about Jephthah, that's probably it. But there's more. Jephthah was a scoundrel and an outlaw, really, even though he judged Israel for 6 years. Here's some things about Jephthah that I really noticed this week reading the book of Judges. It starts with the lead up to the fight with the Ammonites. And again, I'm going to lean heavily on the message Bible. The Ammonites prepared for war, setting up camp in Gilead, east of the Jordan. And Israel set up camp. The leaders in Gilead said, "Who will stand up for us against the Ammonites? We'll make him head over everyone in Gilead." Jephthah the Gileadite was one tough warrior. He was the son of a prostitute. But Gilead, the man, was his father. Meanwhile, Gilead's legal wife had given him other sons, and when they grew up, his wife's sons threw Jephthah out of the house. They told him, "You're not getting any of our family inheritance. You're the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and went to live in the land of Tob. And some riffraff joined him and went around with him. It's kind of a gang. Some time passed, and then the Ammonites started fighting Israel. With the Ammonites at war with them, the elders of Gilead went to Jephthah, went to get him from the land of Tob, and they said to Jephthah, "Come, be our general, and we'll fight the Ammonites." And Jephthah said, "But you hate me. You kicked me out of my house. You kicked me out of my family home, so why are you coming to me now? Because you're in trouble, right?" And the elders of Gilead replied, "That's it, exactly. We've come to get you to go with us and fight the Ammonites. You will be the head of all of us, all the Gileadites." And so Jephthah did, and the elders did. Well, after some more diplomacy and back and forth, and some more saber-rattling, some accusations and counter-accusations, and some chest-thumping God talk between Jephthah and the Ammonites, and he was like this, "Our God is bigger and better than your God." That's what it came down to. After all that, communications finally broke down, and the battle was engaged. God's Spirit came upon Jephthah, it says, and Jephthah made a vow before God. "If you give me a clear victory over the Ammonites, then I'll give to God whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in one piece from among the Ammonites. I'll offer it up in a sacrificial burnt offering." Then Jephthah was off to fight the Ammonites, and God gave them to him. He beat them soundly. It was a massacre. Ammonites brought to their knees by the people of Israel. Jephthah came home. His daughter ran from the house to welcome him home, dancing to tambourines. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. When he realized who it was, he ripped his clothes, saying, "Ah, dearest daughter, I'm dirt. I'm despicable. My heart was torn to pieces, to shreds. I made a vow to God, and I can't take it back." And she said, "Dear father, if you made a vow to God, do to me what you vowed." God did his part and saved you from the Ammonite enemies. And then she said to her father, "But let this one thing be done for me. Give me 2 months to wander through the hills and lament my virginity, since I will never marry, I and my dear friends." "Oh, yes, go," he said. And he sent her off for 2 months. She and her dear girlfriends went among the hills, lamenting that she would never marry. At the end of the 2 months, she came back to her father, and he fulfilled the vow with her that he had made. She had never slept with a man. Later it says Jephthah and the Gileadites got crossways with one of the other tribes of Israel again, and there was more bloodshed and death as the Israelites' back and forth taking of Canaan continued. Judge Jephthah was courageous, certainly, but a scoundrel, foolhardy, petty, and faulty, yet faithful. One of that great cloud, Hebrews says, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight, among many other mysterious and sometimes mythical things. These stories were meant to teach more than to report. But what a motley crew we have for witnesses and examples. What a mess of ancestors in faith and fault. These guys and gals make today's motley crews and messes, like Christian nationalists, seem tolerable, almost some of them anyway. At least the ones that are mostly bluster and bull. Almost tolerable. Almost. Nah. The motley crew of witnesses, all these, though well attested by their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had foreseen something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Not perfect. That's putting it mildly. But they ran the race they were given in the light that they had. It takes that and every other metaphor to glimpse the mystery of God and God's dealing with humanity. Thanks be to God for the pioneer of our faith, which definitely did and definitely does need perfecting as it unfolds with Brother Jesus in our perfect Christ. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that's set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So be inspired and disturbed by those who ran before us and before Jesus. They aren't just witnesses, though. See, they were runners like us. Faithful and faulty runners. Human. Sometimes brave, sometimes afraid, sometimes doubtful, sometimes so full of the Holy Spirit of God that people around them couldn't stand it or couldn't resist joining. May that be so for us. Amen.
Amen.